Firstly, we need to ask, what is Experiment 1006? This experiment is first introduced to us by name in one of the death screens that we can see after we're killed by Huggy Wuggy. This screen says exp.1006, isn't he wonderful? Before putting us back in the game. EXP in this case is referring to scenario, not experience points, unfortunately. The next time we hear a mention of this is actually at the end of the chapter in the final tape called Unknown, where the unnamed scientist says, final log in relation, Experiment 1006, the prototype. Coordination and cooperation is evidently within his skill set, as well as the skill set of all other experiments of his type. Though still missing, today's events are no doubt in relation to him. His absence was a flawed scientific process, which should have under no circumstances been left unaccounted for. That's why I'm making this log, so that the same mistake won't be made twice. Any future experiments will need to be contained and disposed of in a secure location. I'm not worried about myself, one breakthrough and I'll be back. We must forge onwards in the name of science, but for those who are beneath us, understand it or not. End note. And the final time we hear about this experiment is actually in the background text for the trailer of the game. This section, present at 43 seconds, says Experiment 1006, the prototype. He seems serviceable as the prime example for the type of vessel which we are trying to create. Despite his digestive tract being wired properly, the prototype finds no necessity for sustenance, unlike the others. All other experiments can survive while subsisting on much larger portions. Now, this is all well and good, but what does all that information actually tell us? Well, thanks to the trailer text, we know that whoever Experiment 1006 is, they looked like they could be the template for the other experiments going forward. Their naming system also seems to indicate that they were the 6th attempt at creating such a creature, as indicated by MapHat, which I guess makes sense. We also know that despite having a digestive tract, the experiment doesn't need to eat and doesn't seem to try and eat based on the wording of the actual phrase, saying finds no necessity for sustenance instead of just has no need for it. We also know that they went missing and at the time of the final log were still missing, and seems like they are able to cooperate and coordinate with others. And that this character, whoever it is seen as male, which removes Kissy Missy, the pink Huggy, and Poppy from the running. The reasonable assumption that Huggy is Experiment 1006 is thanks to the fact that he's the main antagonist of this chapter. However, there are a couple things that I'd like to point out. Mainly the fact that if this experiment went missing, and was still missing at the end of this log, as well as them wanting to dispose of and contain their other experiments like some weird SCP Foundation, how was he back come the start of the game? And how is he where they decided to seemingly store the other experiments, since this was supposed to be locked up securely? Considering how Poppy is here, and presumably the others are as well, this must be their version of the SCP containment zone, right? Because if it is, it makes no sense for Huggy to be here if he is Experiment 1006. It's also worth mentioning that Experiment 1006 is seen as the template for how they want to create their other creatures. And like, why would the one that seems to be absolutely kill crazy be their template? That just seems like a bad idea, unless that's what they intended. Plus, they said that this experiment isn't actively seeking sustenance, and finds no necessity for it. But Huggy is actively trying to kill and eat us, from what the death screen seems to indicate. So what's the deal there? And just as Experiment 1006 Isn't He Beautiful could be referring to Huggy, couldn't it also be referring to us as well? I mean, all the other death lines are about us in one way or another, so why would this one be any different? It just seems like they were hyping this experiment up so much that it can't reasonably be Huggy Wuggy, especially since that experiment had escaped. And who comes back after a while? Us. It also ties into the we are a toy theory that's been circulating on the internet, since if we are a toy, we could very well be Experiment 1006 that fled after we realized how messed up everything was, but eventually we came back when Poppy sent us a letter. Which, I mean, that's a whole other can of worms, right? Like, how would Poppy know to send us a letter specifically? Cause that's a whole other thing I didn't think of. I'm thinking of it as I'm reading the script. Hold on. What? How did Poppy know to send us a letter? That's sus. That's mega sus. As I said last time, Poppy is a sussy baka. Plus, these kinds of revelations are nothing new to the indie horror scene. A twist like You Are a Toy that was an experiment is honestly expected at this point, especially with the standards that FNAF has set in the indie world. And we know that this series draws inspiration from FNAF since it's made by Mob Studios, started by Enchanted Mob, who has made plenty of FNAF-based Minecraft animations, including the Disconnected series of original music videos, which I used to I used to watch that a lot, actually. I used to watch it to try to gain inspiration for FNAF lists. But with such a heavy amount of content relying on FNAF, it's only natural for FNAF to be an inspiration in Poppy Playtime, as well as Bendy and the Ink Machine, which is something that many people seem to point out in the comments of top 10 scary Poppy Playtime theories when I talked about the possibility of them being in the same universe, which was only meant to be so that I could include it in the thumbnail. So, because you know, the people who watch the FNAF stuff would actually click on it at that point, but now that idea is actually seemingly stronger. And at 10, the cult. Whenever there is a case of a missing group of people in any game, not even just horror games, the classic question of were they in a cult will be asked. And honestly, it seems like it could be possible in Poppy Playtime, just more unlikely than some other options. Even if those options are stranger, which is weird. But I do see a possibility where these workers ended up forming some sort of cult surrounding the perfect toy of Poppy before trying to recreate her success in other toys only to fail miserably. They would end up worshipping Poppy like a god if this was the case. And what do we see? We see a room built specifically for her in a glass case, with a huge Poppy painting around the front door. While yes, this would end up later having graffiti that said not to enter this room, this doesn't seem like the actions of a group that fears Poppy. Why not encase her in steel to make sure that she couldn't escape? Or why paint a giant Poppy around the door when you could just pull a Henry Emily and seal the room off? It doesn't make sense, unless, at least for a time, they worshipped her like a goddess. And at 9, death messages. The messages we get when Huggy Wuggy kills us are certainly interesting. They set the theorist's senses off instantly since there is certainly more going on here. With lines like "don't die just yet," "more lives are at risk than just yours," "it's too early to die," and "I need you alive," there are bound to be many questions just based on us dying. Like, who's talking to us? Are they resurrecting us, or are we actually dead? And what the hell is actually going on here? These are all good questions, and most people assume that Poppy is the one who's talking to us during these death screens, but I'm not so sure if this is the case. It could simply be another character we have yet to be introduced to. With only one chapter out of seemingly 6 currently playable, we don't really know everyone we need to. It could easily be something like the owner of the company who's hiding deep in the bowels of the building who's using a loudspeaker, or someone or something with supernatural abilities who's constantly resurrecting us. And at 8, next, villains. With Huggy Wuggy seemingly meeting his end in chapter 1, we have more chapters that will be needing villains. However, who will these villains be? It's possible that these villains will be the other toys that we've seen around the facility in chapter 1. The Pink Huggy, Brawn the Dinosaur, Boogiebot, Catbee, and Candy Cat are all possibilities for the next chapters, as well as Poppy herself, who will probably be the final villain if she is one at all. More on that later. But who will be the villain of chapter 2? MatPat seems to think that it's going to be Cappy, who was the only other toy featured on more than a poster in this chapter, with the exception of Poppy herself, since we have to make a Cappy toy to move on with the game, and then that toy seemingly disappears. However, I have no idea how they plan on making Cappy scary. Like, what? It's half bee, half cat. How is that supposed to terrify me? Unless, like, I have allergies to both. Like, a Huggy already looks scary enough. Just the fact that he's like a monster, then you can just add teeth to it. But a cat and a Catbee? It doesn't really seem that freaky to me. Although I will be interested to see how they do it. And at 7, GrabPack. The GrabPack is certainly an interesting item. Used as in essence giant sticky hands, the first half of the GrabPack is granted to us at the very beginning of the game and is a key mechanic in the game, being the main way to solve most of the game's puzzles. However, one of the big questions is why do we need this GrabPack? Other than electricity puzzles, grabbing tape, and blocking progression, why are we limited to using this? It's almost as if we don't have any actual hands to use, but that raises the question, how are we able to use the GrabPack if that was the case? Since we would normally just assume that we're just pulling triggers on some handles or something. But even before getting the GrabPack, we don't see any of our body, not even our normal hands. And why is that? Well, maybe there's more of an explanation coming later on. And at 6, Poppy's a good guy. The first chapter of Poppy Playtime ends with us opening Poppy's display case with the lights flickering and her saying, "You opened my case," in what also seems to be an almost thankful tone. This is also something that MatPat mentioned in his game theory episode on the subject. This also relates to who Matt believes is behind Poppy, or I guess who Poppy really is, and that's Stella, a woman who is obsessed with trying to live forever and bringing joy to children like her toys did for her. And what better way to do that than being turned into a living toy? Well, there are actually plenty of ways that you could do that don't involve having to convert your living flesh into a doll that talks to kids, but hey, it's an indie game. Plus, if Stella wanted to be a toy, she wouldn't be mad about being turned into one, she'd be delighted. And now, thanks to you opening her door, she can go and bring that joy to children. Or will she? Halfway through into number 5, global massacre. The idea that there is something bigger at stake here is another idea that's been floating around the internet. Thanks to the death line of "there are more lives at stake than just yours, wake up," which could also allude to Dream Theory, but I'm not touching that one with a top 10-foot pole. Get it? The global massacre idea started because, well, what else is going on to cause more lives to be at stake here other than toys actively trying to kill you? Plus, this only happens if you die and don't get rid of Huggy Wuggy at the end of the chapter. Since he bashes his head multiple times, I'm going to guess that they're definitely dead at this point. Plus, this thing is like 11 feet tall and definitely wants to go on a mass killing spree, with one section of the trailer suggesting that it just kills for fun and doesn't require sustenance. So what's the overall goal here? Well, we still don't know. With only one chapter out, we can't really gather all that much evidence, but alas, we're guessing anyway. Mostly because I wanted a break from FNAF, and this seems like something you'd all be into. And at 4, Poppy's hair. Poppy's hair is meant to smell like poppies because that's her name. However, poppies themselves don't really have much of a smell unless you're talking about the ones made for a certain kind of substance. Or the ones used to make a certain kind of substance, I should say. Those poppies are used for various illicit substances, however, they are also good at putting people to sleep. It was even used as a form of treatment when medicine wasn't really as advanced as it is today. So, could this have been the point behind Poppy's hair? Could this doll have actively been selling to parents instead of their kids? If this doll was shown to be able to keep kids calm or put them to sleep, I'm sure a load of parents, especially in the 1960s when Poppy was invented, would have been down for it, especially if the kids were like me. I literally at one point tried to run into traffic. I knew what adulthood would be like. And we know that the company behind Poppy and the others are certainly not the pinnacle of corporate decency. Definitely not setting the gold standard for how to treat their employees, so is it possible that they could have done this and not really cared about the consequences? It's an indie game. Absolutely. Getting close to the end, and in number 3, people are toys. One of the biggest theories that I've seen that seems to be going in the right direction is that the monster toys we've been dealing with are actually humans. But not the classic humans possess these toys way, but rather they're made of human flesh and bone. These are intentionally a human monstery toy hybrid that was an attempt to recreate the success of Poppy. It's worth noting that when we take care of Huggy, he does bash his head off multiple things on the way down. However, these hits also end up leaving blood behind. And Poppy's eyes are really realistic. Now, an animatronic wouldn't leave blood behind if it's bashed its head, so that removes the possibility of these being animatronics, thank God. So the only thing that would really leave blood is an organic being with flesh. And as we learn in a moment from the trailer for the game, Huggy Wuggy has a digestive tract. When showing Poppy's voice box, it's covered and even dripping with blood. So what's the deal here? Well, the employees did disappear, right? And the game even tells us that they never left the building, so where are they? They're in the toys. But ultimately, in at number 2, FNAF Multiverse. Okay, look now, I know this is going to make a lot of Poppy heads mad, but this is something that this channel is in essence obligated to talk about. Now, do I believe FNAF and Poppy Playtime share a universe or even a multiverse? No, not at all. But am I talking about this for the thumbnail? Abso-freaking-lutely. So, right off the bat, there are some similarities that we should point out between Poppy Playtime and FNAF. 1. They're both indie horror titles. They both also feature childhood figures turned killers, and that in some way all of these characters are human, be it by possession in FNAF's case, or by literally made of flesh to be your tormentor like in Poppy Playtime. However, are there any other similarities that we can use in-universe? Well, while there may be no references to FNAF in the games from what I could tell, this does seem to be the story of FNAF just on another Earth, where instead of making Circus Baby and the Funtime animatronics, William could have just made the Poppy doll instead. Notice how the two share a similar design. And while yes, Poppy was made in the 60s, maybe this is just what happened if William was born earlier than he was supposed to be. I mean, of course, this is all for fun, and is most certainly not the case, but it's fun to speculate anyway, right? Plus, thumbnail. Finally, in number 1, we are a toy. This is such an interesting theory that I felt the need to talk about it. The idea that we ourselves are a toy is so seemingly off the rails that it fits perfectly within this story. If people are being turned into monstrous versions of these toys, and Huggy Wuggy was Experiment 1006, what if we are Experiment 1007, or are going to be 107? Starting off the game, we don't really see any of our own body, not even our hands like I mentioned before, only being able to grab stuff with the GrabPack given to us at the start of the game. So why would we not be able to to use our own hands if we are human. That would just be instinctive, right? Well, it would make sense if we were a toy, but the game didn't want us to know that yet. It could also explain how we're brought back to life over and over, and that one death line of death isn't permanent, since being a toy combined with a human would most likely not let us die permanently, especially if there is some other entity that's able to resurrect us. Now, I don't know, but being a toy sounds like it could certainly be where this game is going. It wouldn't be that big of a leap, honestly. And after dealing with FNAF for like, what, 2 years at this point, I feel like this is not that big of a deal. It hasn't been 2 years, it's been like 1.5 maybe. And at 10, next villains. With Huggy Wuggy hopefully meeting his demise in chapter 1, we have more chapters that will be needing villains. However, who will these villains be? It's possible that these villains will be other toys that we've seen around the facility in chapter 1, via posters mostly. The pink Huggy, which is actually named Kissy Missy, Brawn the Dinosaur, Boogiebot, Candy Cat, and Catbee are all possibilities for the next chapters, as well as Poppy herself, who will probably be the final villain if she is one at all, more on that later. But who will be the villain of chapter 2 specifically? Well, MatPat seems to think that it's going to be Catbee, who was the only other toy featured on more than a poster in this chapter with the exception of Poppy herself, since we end up having to make a Catbee toy to move on in the game, and then that toy seemingly disappeared. However, I have no idea how they plan on making Catbee scary. Like, it's half bee, half cat. How is that supposed to terrifying me as bad as Huggy? Like, Huggy already looks pretty scary since he's just like a monster. He's basically, in essence, like a blue blob. But like a cat and a Catbee, like, unless I'm allergic, how are you actually supposed to make me scared? I'll be impressed if you do that, Enchanted Mob. I'll be impressed. Although it is also theorized that the machine that we use to create the Catbee toy is also what makes toys into humans, or humans into toys. And at 9, the other door. Now there is something that seemingly nobody in our comments wants to know, but something I myself had a question about ever since I watched Eddie VR play Poppy Playtime on his second channel. This question was, what about the first door that requires 2 hands that we see in Huggy Wuggy's main display room, I guess I should call it. And this is a popular enough question that Terrico actually talked about it on his channel. The quick answer is that you can't go back to this room after getting the red hand apparently, which is unfortunate. However, this leads fans to believe that this door will be involved in chapter 2. Perhaps it's where the rest of the toys are, since when we left chapter 1, we were on a catwalk above a who knows how deep hole, so getting back to that room is probably going to take some time. But since we should hopefully still have the GrabPack, it wouldn't be unreasonable to assume that we would end up going back to this room and then unlocking that door. It was blocked by another hand for a reason, since if they didn't plan on actually using it, they wouldn't just put a door there, they would have just made it a wall. So it's most likely that we'll be seeing that room in chapter 2 or at some point later on, that it leads to the rest of the experiments. And at 8, more GrabPack. Speaking of the GrabPack, will there be more to its mechanics in the coming chapters rather than just pulling things over and diverting power? There is plenty of fun stuff that they can do with the GrabPack, I'm sure, like maybe tripping monsters, or maybe we can like throw objects around instead of just pulling them this time. The GrabPack can be such a diverse tool that it can, in theory, do anything, especially since it can literally move power around. Like, because of that, we won't really question what else the GrabPack is able to do. Like, oh, it launches nuclear warheads by accidentally picking up too many VHS tapes? Oh well, makes sense. Oh, it can actually create entirely new monsters just by being around the toys for too long while attached to someone? Oh, they're alright, fair enough. Like what? Wait, do we actually think that it's possible for the GrabPack to actually be the reason that some of these toys are organic beings? I mean, it's a bit of a stretch, pun absolutely intended, but like I've said, anything the GrabPack can do we just kinda need to accept, right? Huh, well, maybe it's this. And at 7, Poppy's power. Poppy's hair is meant to smell like poppies because, you know, that's her name. However, poppies don't really have all that much of a smell, unless we're talking about the ones made for a certain kind of substance. These opium poppies are used for various illicit substances. However, they're also very good at putting people to sleep. It was even used as a form of treatment when medicine wasn't advanced as it was today, and I mean, honestly, it should still be a treatment. So, could this have been the point behind Poppy's hair? Could this doll's power, I guess, actually be the ability to put things, or I guess other monsters, to sleep? And if this doll was shown to be able to keep kids calm and put them to bed, I guess. I'm sure a load of parents, especially in the 60s, would have been down for that. This had to have been mentioned for a reason. There's no way that they said, oh, her hair smells like poppies just because. And we know that the company behind Poppy and the others are certainly not the pinnacle of corporate decency. Definitely not getting the gold standard for how they treat literally the world. So it is possible that they could have done this and then not really cared about the consequences. And will this ability end up coming in useful? Possibly. And at 6, eradication. The idea that there's something bigger at stake here is something else that's been floating around the internet, thanks to specifically the deathline of "there are more lives at stake than just yours, wake up," which also can allude to dream theory, but haha, I ain't touching that with a 90-foot pole at this point. Actually, that would be hella hard to hold on to. I'm not touching this with anything, okay? The global massacre idea started because, well, I mean, like, come on. What else is going to cause more lives to be at stake here, other than toys actively trying to kill you? Because, like, mass toy genocide? You know what? Straight up, Toy Story. Plus, this only happens if you die and you don't end up getting rid of Huggy Wuggy at the end of the chapter, since, you know, he bashes his head multiple times, and hopefully, I really hope he's dead, okay? He definitely should be dead at this point, if he's an organic being. Plus, like, you know, an 11-foot tall monster who definitely wants to go on a mass killing spree. Yeah, with just one section of the trailer suggesting that it kills for fun and doesn't require sustenance if he is actually Experiment 1006. So yeah, well, like, what's the overall goal here? No idea. But with one chapter out, we can't really get all that much information about it. The only information we have is through a deathline, so. A global massacre, though, would certainly be an interesting way for the series to go. Halfway through into number 5, the experiments. So we know that there are probably at least 6, but upwards of 1,006 experiments involving Playtime Co. and their desire to recreate Poppy, the perfect human toy hybrid. Most people believe that these experiments will be revealed to be the other toys that we learned about in chapter 1, but my question is, where would the other 1,000 experiments be if that is truly the number instead of just 6? Because, you know what, in my opinion, why would you start a numbering system at 1001? My thinking is that it's probably going to be the smaller toys. The small toys in the boxes that the children would actually get would explain the 1,000 additional experiments that we were told about. And it would honestly make sense company-wise, since they advertised Poppy as being the world's first truly intelligent doll. But if that is the case, how would they keep that promise if only that one for the commercial was actually, like, intelligent and part human? It would make sense for that to be the case, but advertising laws could in theory help prevent that. But courts also did say that Apple blatantly lying in one of their ads was fine, since apparently a new iPhone being a third the price and 3 times the speed was too unbelievable for it to be believed realistically, which now is definitely true because Apple cutting costs? Funny. They're gonna come out with 6 adapters. But still, if there are 1,000 other experiments lying around, I wouldn't be surprised if they're the small dolls like the ones we see at the start of chapter 1 in Huggy's room. You know, the ones in the boxes, and then there's the one that you can kick around. Thanks for Terrico for finding that. And at 4, tapes. The various tapes we found over the first chapter helped Mob Studios work in the lore of the story that they wanted to tell. However, with chapter 2 coming, what can we expect from these tapes? Really, it's up in the air since we aren't quite sure where the story is going, but we can assume that now since we've let Poppy out of her case, they will be about her. At least some of them will. The others will probably be about whatever enemy we're facing in this chapter, as well as maybe some more information about the process of turning humans into toys. Or if we are in fact Experiment 1006 instead of Huggy, then maybe we also get more information on that experiment as well, which I guess would be us. But if Huggy was 1006, it would make sense to refer to Experiment 1007 or 1005 in these tapes, which would probably be the enemy we were facing in that chapter. But even on that point, if 1006 is something they'd be trying to replicate, shouldn't there be more than just 6 experiments? Like, I've said this in other videos, but like, after all, they wouldn't stop after they finally got one right. Would they? Like, I wouldn't. That's like, oh, I finally got the settings on my 3D printer working perfectly. Let's never print something again. It doesn't make sense. I don't have a 3D printer, but like, I want one. But like, that's kind of my thought process here. If you get it right, you don't just stop. Getting close to the end in number 3, Poppy's the villain. The prevailing idea about the game series overall is that Poppy will end up actually being the villain, and it makes sense. Her name is the title of the game, and she could be controlling the toys from inside her case. The fact that her name is on the game is kind of a dead giveaway. I mean, it's not like Freddy Fazbear was helpful in Five Nights at Freddy's, right? Well, this idea is also reinforced by the sheer creep factor we get when releasing her. "You opened my case" is said in such a chilling way that it's hard not to take that line as anything but a threat. She might as well just have put like that simple like smiling emoji, like the one with no cheeks or anything, just that one? Yeah, you know what I mean. And additionally, like, why was she being kept in a sealed glass case anyway? It's also concerning that after running away from a giant toy trying to kill us, we instantly end up releasing yet another toy that is known for being sentient in some form thanks to her being the world's first truly intelligent toy. And I mean, even if you're willing to be turned into a toy, being forced to stay in a glass case for who knows how many years is really going to be a downer. And then, you know, there's the whole we just narrowly escaped from another toy by the skin of our teeth. But yeah, open that case. What can go wrong? Are there no horror movies in these universes? Like, God! Penultimately, in at number 2, we are a toy. This is such an interesting theory that I felt the need to talk about it again. The idea that we ourselves are a toy is so seemingly off the rails that it fits perfectly within this story and just the indie game world in general. If people are being turned into monstrous versions of these toys, and Huggy Wuggy was supposedly experiment 1006, what if we are also an experiment? Starting off the game, we aren't really able to see any of our body, and this continues throughout the chapter. Only being able to grab stuff with the GrabPack even at the start of the game, cause we don't grab anything with our actual hands, we never see them. So the thing is, could we be a toy? Are we really human? Come on. Look at this logically. It would make sense if we are a toy, but the game didn't want us to know that yet, so it didn't show us literally us. It could also explain how we're being brought back to life over and over again, and that the one death line of death isn't permanent, since, you know, being a toy combined with a human would most likely not cause you to die permanently. I mean, just look at William Afton, for example. Especially if there is some other entity that's able to resurrect us. Look, I don't know, okay? But being a toy sounds like it could be where this game is going, along with the whole mass global extinction event kind of thing. We have a whole separate video on the subject, and that video also talks about if we are Experiment 1006 instead of Huggy, so feel free to check that out, link is in the iCard. And finally, in at number 1, Poppy the Good Guy. The first chapter of Poppy Playtime ends with us opening Poppy's display case with the lights flickering and her saying, "You opened my case," in an absolutely freaky tone. But it also seems to be almost thankful in a way. This is also something that MatPat mentioned in his game theory episode on the subject. This also relates to who Matt believes is behind Poppy, or I guess who Poppy really is, and that's Stella, a woman who is obsessed with trying to live forever and bring joy to her children like her toys did her. And what better way to do that than being turned into a living toy? Well, okay, there's definitely better ways to go about that doesn't involve you becoming a frickin' toy, but hey, it's the indie game world. Plus, if Stella wanted to be a toy, she wouldn't be mad about being turned into one. She'd be delighted, but like, again, she wouldn't be happy about being sealed in a glass case. Or would she? I don't know what she's into.